Welcome to the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Dame, holistic nutrition coach and speaker. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another incredible episode here on the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm being joined by an amazing new friend of mine, Hope Pedraza. Am I pronouncing that right, Hope?
You are, yes.
Yes, thank you for joining us. I'm so excited to have you on and to have this conversation that we're going to be diving into today. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm so glad we get to collab and we get to swap our expertises, and it's so fun.
Yeah, and learn from each other. I know we were just chatting before I hit record. I was like, "Ooh, I'm excited to learn from you with some of the things that we're planning to go into today." Yeah. So I think this is one of the things I love most about podcasting.
Totally.
Right? We get to meet all these amazing new humans and ask the questions that I want to know so that I'm learning.
Exactly. I love it.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So I love sort of starting off, with everyone that I bring on the show, just giving everyone a little bit of a background of your story. I introduced you in the intro to this episode, but can you share a little bit more of your personal story into, obviously you've trained and you've done a lot in the health space, and, I'm sure there's a story behind sort of how you got into all of that.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like there's kind of like two pieces of the story. The big piece I think that led me in this direction was my background. I was a dancer starting at age 3 up until my 20 somethings. And that got me into movement and got me into fitness, and it got me into Pilates. And so that led me into kind of this realm of just like loving movement and the human body and just being fascinated with the human body. And so I started teaching Pilates when I was in college as just like a side gig. Like it was, Pilates went well with dance. And so I loved Pilates, and that led me eventually to open my own studio. And it was from opening my studio where I decided, as I evolved and my studio kind of evolved, like I really wanted to create this comprehensive experience for people who came into my studio. I wanted to be able to offer them like the nutrition piece with the movement piece, knowing like you can't have one without the other. Right. And so, I did like a basic nutrition coaching certification just to start out, like, just given the just basic, nutritional guidance or whatever. And then, the more I started working with women, the more I realized like they were coming to me for, I'm using air quotes here, like weight loss, right? They wanted to lose weight or whatever. And when I started working with them, I realized like there were so many deeper things at play here. Like they had hormonal issues and they had thyroid things and inflammation. They had all these deeper things at play where I'm realizing like, okay, the weight loss here is really the symptom, right? It's not really why they're coming to me. And so that kind of led me down the path of really diving into all this additional education and diploma and certifications and everything that I did, just really being able to meet people at a deeper level and understanding that like the weight loss and the physical things people are really coming to me for, like have such a deeper root cause, right? And so I wanted to be able to offer that to them. And then I think the other piece of my story that kind of led me this direction was my own kind of health journey. I grew up with a lot of digestive issues, and I probably had, I feel like I had at least 3 colonoscopies before I was probably 12 or 13 years old, just trying to figure out what was going on. And at the end of the day, it was the doctor says, oh, it's IBS, which even now it's still a very blanket statement. But back then it was really like, we don't know, your stomach's messed up. And so there's no like protocol, there's no help, no nothing. And so the older I got, I really started educating myself and trying to understand like nutrition and the body and all those kind of things. And so I think that also led me down the path of nutrition as well. I went vegan cold turkey in my 20s thinking like this will be the thing that'll fix I was able to heal my IBS and my allergies and all these things. And so kind of putting the pieces together, like, okay, I'm seeing the connection now with the nutrition and the health and the gut and all these things. And so I think my own health journey also helped me realize too, like how much the wellness equation is more than just, the fitness and the movement, which is important, but there's so many more pieces to it. And then as I know we'll talk about as we kind of talk about adrenals and stuff, that was kind of the other piece too, is I'm realizing how, okay, I got the physical piece and I'm honing in on this nutrition piece, but then there's kind of this mental, emotional piece that also has to fit in too. So just, as you, I'm sure you have a similar story, right? Like how your own journey kind of paves the way for your journey through your business. And it just kind of, every brick lays on top of the next one. And it just, just evolves as you evolve as a human.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with that. And I learned that really early on. I'm starting my business about 6 years ago and helping women in this way. I was like, oh, it was every, year I would go through my own journey or my own healing or my own stuff. And then the following year, that's what I was helping my clients with. So
Exactly.
yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
That piece of your story. It sounds like you were really, beautifully swept up into this world of movement and nutrition. And I love hearing you mention, because I think we have a lot in common in that realm, understanding that there's energetics behind what's going on as well. That it's not even just about the food and the movement, right? There's so much more below the surface, and I'm excited to get to that part. But let's talk about some of the physical stuff first that I really want to pick your brain on, because this is an area that I'll absolutely admit I am not an expert in. I have not done all the research as we kind of talk about minerals. So I don't know about everybody listening, but I know, I used to, when I'd hear the word minerals, I would think about like, oh, just like calcium or like hard water, or I'd think about electrolyte drinks, right?
Yep.
And the world, especially at least what I used to see, right? And maybe what a lot of you listening are seeing, right? When we talk about nutrition, everybody is talking about macronutrients, right? Everybody is talking about protein, carbs, or fat, right? Like that's the main conversation. So maybe start us off, Hope, for anyone who's not familiar, what are minerals and why are they actually important for our health?
Yeah, a good place to start. So minerals, you and people listening might have heard this too, that they're considered the spark plugs in the body, which essentially what that means is every reaction in the body, every enzyme needs minerals, combination of minerals to start that. Like there's no reaction in the body that can start without the minerals. That's the spark plugs that drive these reactions in the body. And so because they are the spark plug for every reaction in the body, we need them and we need the right balance of them. And so I find that this is a piece that, because I think, like you said, I think, we know what calcium, we hear calcium and magnesium, we hear like the major ones, and we know we need it. But I don't really think there's much of an understanding of the smaller ones, and then also like the relationship between them and what they really do in the body. Like we know we need magnesium, but we don't really know why we need it, right? We know we need calcium, but we know, so I feel like there's so much to like understanding the relationships between minerals and how they kind of play together and getting that right balance. Because that's the other thing too, like there is a balance, and there is such a thing as too much of a mineral, right? It's too much and too little. We want the Goldilocks, just enough. We want just enough.
Yeah. That's amazing. So I love this, because I remember when I learned this back when I was studying nutrition as well. I was like, oh, it makes so much sense around it's not just about getting this huge amount of a certain mineral. It's a balance.
Right.
So can you speak a little bit more, maybe give a specific example of like, what do you mean about the balance?
Yeah, for sure.
How do you recommend people even figure out, are they getting the right balance or not?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the balance here, and I will say, first and foremost, the only way to really know is, so I'm an FDN, functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, and so I do the functional labs, right? So the only way to really know is to do the labs, right? To get the data in front of you to see. But what it comes down to really, there are the big four, right? Calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium, and those are the ones we need the most of. And I find that when I do labs on my clients, there's a lot of surprises for people. And I think this is where we get into the balance piece. I think one of the big shocks for people is sodium. Sodium is a big one. And most people, because I think, I feel like sodium has been demonized kind of like carbs, for a while, where sodium is like, we're like, cut out the salt, high blood pressure, which is true. I'm not saying that there is a truth to that, but the truth isn't really what we think it is. And if you dive into the research, and I have read so many studies, and I went down a rabbit hole not too long ago looking into these studies, because I read an article basically saying that when all this came out about how, salt is bad for you and it, causes high blood pressure and strokes and all this stuff, that when that first came out, it was a doctor who basically had some patients with high blood pressure and then just made like the assumption, like there was no like data to back up his assumption. And then people just kind of ran with it. And so the data actually shows that there actually isn't a link between sodium and high blood pressure. That's not what's causing the high blood pressure. It's the sodium retention from things like refined salt in the Western diet, right? And so when I do these labs with my clients, I find that honestly, the majority of the time, deficiency is what I'm seeing in sodium rather than excess. And the thing is with sodium, our adrenals use so much sodium. Our adrenals need sodium to function. And when our adrenals are working overtime, it's just pumping through that sodium. It's just pumping through it. And so you start to get depleted, right? Because our adrenals, like we were talking about before we started, so many people are just running on fumes, right? And our adrenals are so tired. And so we're just using it all up. And so I find with my clients, that's usually a shock to them because they're like, I eat salt all the time or, whatever, but that's not the thing. When we're talking about sodium and we're talking about salt. So salt, like table salt. Table salt is like the equivalent of white sugar, right? It's been stripped of every nutritional value. It's had chemicals put on it to strip it from all the stuff, right? It's like the cheap version, right? Of just like white sugar. Whereas if you look at like unrefined sea salt, and Celtic salt is always my recommendation for my clients. It has some sources say that it has up to 90 trace minerals in Celtic salt. 86 to 90 is usually what you read. But there's all these other trace minerals in it. So you're getting all these other minerals with the sodium, and those other minerals are helping with the fluid retention in your cells. So it's pushing the fluid where it needs to go, right? And so I think that's the other, we just don't really understand how sodium works in the body and understand that there's a difference between table salt and like actual like good quality sodium, right? Like unrefined salt. So yeah, that was a long way around the answer to your question, but I feel like the big one, the big surprise really, sodium is usually the big surprise. And then knowing that sodium, there's a relationship with potassium, right? Sodium, potassium kind of have this give and take relationship. And knowing that we need both, we need a balance of both. And then calcium is usually another surprise for people too. We know we need calcium. And the thing with calcium that's interesting is there is a thing as too much calcium in the body. And calcium is a structural mineral. Like 99% of it is supposed to be in your bones and your teeth. And when we get too much, we get this kind of calcium overload from things like stress, which basically like pulls calcium out of the structures it's supposed to be in, and it pushes that out into your tissues. Trauma can be another one. It's like a protective mechanism with the body, and it pulls the calcium, and it kind of builds this protective shell around like your cells and your nerves and stuff. It can build what's called the calcium shell. And so I find for right now with my clients, it's kind of a 50-50, people that have this huge calcium buildup and then people who have like it's really low. So it's usually one or the other. I have very few clients where it's like, oh, you're just where you need to be with the calcium. But when it's in excess, we have to break through that calcium shell because it starts to cause problems. You've heard of calcifications building up in your body, right? Like bone spurs and calcium in terms of like calcium buildup in your arteries and stuff like that. That's a real problem. And so we have to break up this calcium, and we have to basically push it where it needs to go and break up this calcium shell. So things like vitamin K and boron, like those are things that we need to help balance. So there's the relationship between those two. So we need the calcium, but we need a good balance of like boron and vitamin K and even vitamin D to help like push it where it needs to go. So those are just a couple examples, but kind of an example of kind of there's like this give and take, right, of the minerals and then the things that support the balance of those.
Yeah, that's so eye-opening. Thank you for sharing all of that. Yeah. I know that you're just scratching the surface here, right?
Totally.
There's so much behind this.
Totally.
I know that this isn't easy, and everyone listening, right? It's something to begin investigating, right? And I remember learning that about like the sodium and potassium. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually curious if this is still valid. This was years ago that I learned this, and I know that research and everything's always changing, but this understanding that most people who may be on like the standard American diet, right, are overloaded with the processed salt in the food and are getting very little potassium. So there's like this huge imbalance, right? So it's not necessarily maybe as easy as, well, you're just eating too much salt, stop eating salt. Right. It's also a conversation of how can you get more whole real foods and get more potassium in your diet, right? Because processed food doesn't really have that, unless it's added in or chemically. So that finding that balance, right? It's not just, I know it's the same with omegas, right? Like omega-3, 6, 9, right? It's not about just having too much of one. It's could also be this understanding that we're just not getting enough of the other and to find that equilibrium.
That's exactly it. Yeah. And the potassium is a good point because I find too that And I'm a huge fan of supplements. Like all my clients, we have a supplement protocol, but we know that supplements are just that. They're supplements. And with potassium especially, potassium is one of those that our body really can only absorb so much from supplementation. The rest has to come from food, and food is the best form of getting potassium. And so that's another piece too. Bananas, avocados, coconut water, those are always my big recommendations for potassium, and really getting it from whole food. And yeah, you can take it in supplement form, but there's kind of a threshold where your body's really not going to absorb past a certain amount of in a supplement.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, and I'm lovingly calling all of us out on this, right? Like we are in this world where, and I'm grateful to hear you say that, where so many people think that the supplements are the cure-all, right? Like, oh, I'll just
fix it. Yep.
Yeah, or I'll just take my multivitamin and then I can still eat like crap, right? And it'll all be okay because I'm taking my multivitamin, right? It's such an easy escape, right? Yep. Or like, oh, I don't have to do the real work and actually learn how to cook or learn how to nourish myself. I can just take these vitamins. And
of course,
it's $1 billion industry as well. So it is a fine line of figuring out like, what do I actually need to support me here? Right. And why am I not getting it from food? And how can I work with that, right? Or why am I not absorbing it, right? And looking at guts and all of that. So.
No, it's so true. And I tell my clients that all the time because, I do create a supplement protocol for them. But I always tell them, like, there's so much more to the equation than just the supplements, right? We were talking about earlier, there's the energetics and there's the mind, the body, the emotional. There's all these other pieces where it's like you can spend $1,000 on all these supplements, but if you're not honing in on your stress and your nervous system and all these other pieces, like, you're just throwing your money down the toilet. You're making for expensive pee, which is what a lot of, conventional doctors are telling you anyway. But if you're not managing the other pieces, you really are. You're just wasting your money.
Yeah, 100%. I'm so grateful you said that. So bringing this together specifically, maybe coming into conversation around blood sugar regulation and hormones and obviously the pieces that have. So what impact do these minerals, whether it's, the common ones, or obviously there's a lot of other minerals here that we haven't quite talked about yet, but what role do these play? And are there any specific minerals that are actually supportive for blood sugar regulation and hormone management?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I think when we're looking at hormones and blood sugar, I feel like my focus always goes to the adrenals, which I know I've mentioned before, but my focus really goes to the adrenals. The adrenals are kind of, I feel like your pituitary is kind of like the gas for the engine, and the adrenals are the engine that's making everything running here. And so they're talking to each other, right? And they're kind of telling everything else what to do and where to send things and what hormones are going where, so they're kind of running the show in a way. They're kind of like managing what's going on in your body. And so we know that, to manage blood sugar, there are hormones involved in managing blood sugar. And so when any hormone is out of balance, it's going to cause other hormones to get out of balance. So first and foremost, I always feel like addressing the adrenals and what's going on with your adrenals is going to be the first step. And so when we're looking at specifically minerals for your adrenals, sodium, like I mentioned before. So sodium is a big one. And we can talk vitamins too, because there's also vitamin C is a huge one for your adrenals too. But your adrenals, you're going to find the highest concentration of vitamin C in your adrenals. So vitamin C and sodium are really supportive for your adrenals. When you're supporting your adrenals, you're supporting your stress response, right? And our stress response is really what's going to drive our blood sugar levels, right? When there's spikes in cortisol, it's going to spike your insulin levels. Like there's a connection there. So being able to manage your stress response by taking care of your adrenals is really going to help with the blood sugar situation. So magnesium is another one. I didn't mention magnesium. Magnesium is another one that's super supportive for the adrenal, which, magnesium is in so many reactions in the body. It's, 500 or 600, depending on what source you look at. It's involved in so many reactions in the body. And there's a connection, and I see this when I do my hair tissue analysis for my clients. There's a connection between sodium and magnesium in the adrenals, and we kind of look at the ratio there. And because magnesium is used in so many reactions in the body, it's so easily depleted. And this is another one when your adrenals are running in overdrive, magnesium stores are getting depleted like super fast. And so being able to support your adrenals with these minerals is really going to help stabilize what everything else that's going in your body, including your blood sugar. Another really important mineral is chromium. Chromium is necessary for basically just regulating your insulin, and it works alongside your adrenals for the production of insulin. They all work together. And so chromium is one of those supplements that I always add to a protocol when I'm looking, because blood sugar regulation, we know, like blood sugar regulation, when your blood sugar is all over the place, this is another stressor on the body. So it's kind of like this vicious cycle, right? Like our cortisol is like spiked, right? And then it's spiking your insulin levels, but then the huge fluctuations in our insulin levels are spiking more cortisol because it's a stress on the body. So you just get into like this vicious cycle. And so blood sugar is always huge for me, helping my clients manage their blood sugar, so that we are managing that stress response on the body. So I'm always adding chromium to their supplement protocol. And you can get it from some foods, but I find supplementation for that one is easier. Chromium picolinate is the best source of that one. But that one is easy to supplement, and it really does. I feel like that one works like smoothly with all the other supplements that we're adding in, with like the sodium, magnesium, and all that. But that's a really good one for blood sugar regulation. And then this isn't exactly minerals, but when we're talking about like caring for your adrenals and kind of managing that stress response, which helps us manage the blood sugar, we also have to look at like what else is triggering our adrenals, right? So stress, of course, is the big one. Like just stress, whether it's, it can be physical stress, it can be emotional stress, mental stress, like there's so many stressors, right? And figuring out what's triggering the stress response, and then what's kind of perpetuating that like stress response, like caffeine, really, not just coffee, but caffeine in general. And, not to demonize coffee, because there's some health benefits and stuff, that's a whole different conversation. But for my clients, caffeine is always the first thing to go for my clients. Like, we're getting rid of things that are initiating the stress response, and caffeine is a huge one, because caffeine it has a neuroexcitatory effect in the body. And so it's telling your pituitary, like, blah, emergency, like something's going on. And so then it's spiking that cortisol response in the adrenals. And so caffeine does give your adrenals a jolt, and it does, affect how cortisol is emitted so it does affect your body in that way. And then, so other stressors like, physical stress, for example, is another one. I find, and I'm saying this from like personal experience as like a obsessive exerciser for many years of my life, and totally destroying my adrenals. Like too much exercise is a real thing, and that is a stress on the body, and especially when your cortisol or your adrenals are already tired and fatigued, like it's just perpetuating it. And so going back to your original question about the blood sugar, I really feel like honing in on the adrenals is such a huge piece of the blood sugar regulation piece, because it's what's driving it, right? I just feel like with the adrenals and the cortisol response and how its connection to insulin, like it's all connected. So I really hone in on the adrenals first and foremost to help with that next step with the blood sugar regulation.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I know that like this, and this is for everyone listening, right? This, what Hope is describing, right, is this one of the reasons why so many of us are stress eaters, right? Mm-hmm. Like when we get stressed, it's like, oh, I need more sugar. I need food, right? Because we're getting that insulin flood and the cortisol flood and like all of this blood sugar dysregulation happening when we're in that state. And I so want to dive deeper into this conversation around stress and the more energetic emotional pieces, and we're going to. But I want to ask you one final question here around like the minerals specifically, because I think this is really important. Now everybody's listening going, well, how do I know if I have the right balance of minerals? And how do I get this? And how do I know what's going on in my body? So testing is such an important tool that we can use in any area, whether it's our gut or our hormones or with minerals as well. So this is something I do not know a lot about. Can you tell us about like the different types of mineral testing that are available, and what do you recommend as sort of the best way to navigate and get a snapshot of what's going on for us?
Yeah. It's a good question, because it's a good distinction, because you can go to the doctor and they can run a blood panel, right, to look at mineral levels. But the issue is that when you're looking at it from that piece and you're looking at just the blood panel, it's a very acute picture. It's a very small picture of what's going on in the body of this like very specific period of time. And not only that, but a lot of the minerals we're looking at, a lot of the important ones are intracellular, meaning they're supposed to be in your cells. So when you're looking at it in the blood, it's not the whole picture, right? And I've had issues like that before where they're like, oh, I went and got my potassium levels checked, And they said my potassium was too high because it was in their blood. Well, yeah, it's supposed to be in your cells. So actually at a cellular level, you're deficient because it's in your blood. So it's not accurate. So what I use is called a hair tissue and mineral analysis. And it's literally you're sitting in your hair as a tissue. And so you're seeing what's being pushed out into your tissue. So you're seeing what's happening at a cellular level rather than kind of big picture, like what's going on in your blood, right? And so it does give you a more accurate picture of what's going on. And it's a look at what's going on chronically over time. So it's giving you a picture of like over the past 3-4 months, like what's been going on with your minerals, what's being pushed out into your tissues. And so you're able to see deficiencies, like, because a lot of times too, when you look at things that are high on, this is why like someone trained in HMA, it's important to have someone who's trained in it because it can be deceiving because you could look at the lab and be like, oh, my calcium, magnesium are like through the roof, they're too high. But actually when they're being pushed out into your tissues, it means it's not bioavailable. So your body's not able to use it. So it's really important to have somebody who knows how to read the lab to be able to understand the relationships and all that, to be able to see exactly what's going on. But yeah, the labs just know that a lot of times the picture that you're getting just from the doctor with the blood work, it's just not the full picture and it's not really that accurate.
Yeah, that's so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I had a hunch that, our traditional medical
Yeah.
system, it's no better here in Canada,
Yeah.
right? Like it's the basic testing
Yeah.
and nobody really understands
Yeah.
the results.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody's guessing.
Yes. And I don't know if the ranges are the same in Canada as they are here, but it's like the conventional, like the standard ranges. It's like, within range, it basically means like, well, you're not dead. So it's like, okay, well, I kind of want to like be healthy and like I'm shooting for optimal health, not just not dead. So the ranges are just it's just not helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that too. I think we've talked about that maybe once or twice on the podcast, but I want to reiterate that because I think this is really important for everybody to understand about those ranges. Like you just said this, right? Is that the range that our traditional system gives is you're not dying range. So you're good, right? But it's not,
Right.
it's not a optimal health range, right? Which is why working with FDN or naturopath or functional medical doctor, all these beautiful alternative, medical practitioners that can do the better testing, right? Can really understand. No, we want to shoot for below that actually,
Yes.
right? So
yes.
Yeah, that's really eye-opening. When I learned that, I was so infuriated and frustrated.
I
People
know.
walking around out there going, I'm healthy,
fine.
right?
Yeah,
because they're in that
totally.
range. And it's like,
Yes.
no, you're just not. There's a
Yes.
difference between not being sick and not being healthy, right?
Totally.
So,
Totally.
yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. Okay, so let's shift gears or dive a little deeper because this is something that is really near and dear to my heart as we talk about stress. And we talk about, obviously we've talked a bit about adrenals. We've talked a little bit about our, stress response. And I'm curious, I know we were talking a little bit before this episode about the word burnout. This is something that we hear a lot. There's actually coaches out there that help women going through burnout. So I'm really curious because maybe some of the women listening are also curious, like what the heck is burnout and how is it different than just regular everyday stress?
Yeah.
And then like, how can we tell, are we, because I don't know, I feel like burnout's become this like catchphrase, right? Oh, I'm burnt out.
Yeah.
Right. But are you really burnt out? And how do we know, I guess how do we define that?
Yeah. No, that's such a good point. And it is, it's kind of like a, buzzword these days about burnout, but we're talking about like actual like burnout, like an adrenal burnout. We're talking about like your adrenals coming into like complete exhaustion. And yes, there is like, there's levels to this, right? Like, adrenal fatigue or whatever term you want to use for it. There's kind of levels to it, right? So your adrenals at some point, they're pumping and pumping and pumping and they're pumping out cortisol and your cortisol is really elevated. And you can run in that state for a certain period of time. Then at some point, your adrenals are going to get super tired and they're going to start pumping out less and less. And you're going to get to this exhaustive phase, which is like full adrenal burnout. It's like my cortisol levels are like in the tank. The energy, feeling low energy, sick all the time, mental, like brain fog. Sorry, I have a screaming kid. You can probably hear. Brain fog, memory issues, low libido, like hormones, all of like. There's so many symptoms when your body starts to like malfunction. It starts here in this exhaustive phase of your adrenals, and full adrenal burnout is like my adrenals they just can't do it anymore. And so, yes, there is a level of stress, but it's when your body starts to dysfunction, like at every level, that when you know you're like in that burnout state. And there's so many pieces of this because by the time you get to that phase, it's not just your adrenals, right? There's all these other things that you have to look, because by now, like your gut's suffering and your hormones are suffering, your blood sugar, like there's all these other things that because you've let it get to the point where it's just totally crashed. So the adrenal burnout or the burnout, you know, however you want to call it, the burnout is like that last, like completely exhaustive phase where your body just starts totally dysfunctioning.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense. Have you experienced that before? Like, has that something that you've been through?
Yeah. So I am like, my personality is like a go, 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 right? I do gazillion things at one time and I go, I don't like to sit still. That's my personality. And I've always just kind of gone and just not ever thought about it. And I knew I was getting tired. Like I knew there's some of those things where it's like, you know, I can power through, I can push through. But it wasn't until I was actually going through my FDN certification through the program, and I had to run all the labs on myself. And I get the labs back and I'm like, holy moly, like my adrenals are hanging on for dear life. And like my cortisol levels were like in the toilet. There's so many things going on with my gut, which, you know, I had dealt with gut stuff for a while and I'd done a lot of work, but like, I mean, it was clear that I was running my body into the ground. And I think once I became aware of it, I started to realize like all these symptoms and things I had just kind of like, you know, pushed to the back of my head, like, oh no, I'll power through. It was like being sore all the time, like things hurting that like, well, it probably shouldn't hurt. Like, you know, just working out was like, I would get super tired after workouts, like not recovering well, getting like colds and stuff pretty frequently, like all these things where it's like, okay, like now it's starting to add up in my head. So yeah, I mean, it was a real eye opener for me. And, you know, I consider myself a pretty healthy person and, you know, I eat clean and this is my world. And seeing that was a huge eye opener for me. Like, okay, like something's got to change, right? Like you can't go on forever because there is a point where your adrenals can totally shut down. Like there's a point, and there's autoimmune things that happen where your adrenals, like adrenal insufficiency is like an actual thing, and you can get to that point. So it's not something you want to play with, right? And you want to just keep pushing off. Like it's something that you really want to address so that it doesn't, you know, get even more severe.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that and your story. I'm curious your thoughts on, you know, it feels like everyone is talking about adrenal fatigue or adrenal issues. You know, everyone is having this challenge, whether it's burnout or adrenal fatigue, whatever you're calling it, right? Why do you think that is? Like, what do you think it is systemically or in our society? Like, I have a couple theories, but I'd be curious about your theories of like, why is this becoming so much more prevalent? Yeah. You know, when, you know, whatever, 10, 20 years ago, it was something that nobody ever talked about or even knew about, right? We didn't even nobody had this problem. Like, what is going on with our stress levels or our society, or what, you know, what do we really need to understand that we're up against here?
Yeah, no, it's such a good point. And, you know, I think, especially in the Western world, right? I think it's different when you look at other cultures. In the Western world, I mean, just like I was saying, my personality was like, go, 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 like, dude, like that's it. That's the society that we live in. In the Western world, it's like, keep going, push harder, do more, you know, move up the ladder, move faster, keep going, don't stop. It's just this constant pressure to do more and accomplish more. And it's like this competition, like who can be the busiest and who can work the hardest and who can, you know, sleep the least and make the most money at the same time. Like it's like this constant competition, and it's really affecting our health. Like the levels of like burnout is one thing, right? But the levels of like chronic disease, chronic illness, autoimmune diseases, like all of that is skyrocketed over the past decade. And I mean, it really all goes back to stress. Like you said before, I mean, it's stress, and it's this like societal pressure to just go and do and keep going, and who needs rest, and you sleep when you die, all like that whole thing. And I think, I do think that there are some like me and you in our world. I know we're seeing things where, okay, we can see little shifts where there are some people speaking out about like, this isn't the way to do it, right? This isn't the way to do this. Is a good way to kill yourself, but this isn't the way to like live and, you know, we're talking about optimal health earlier. But I think it's going to take, I feel like we have a long way to go with that though, because I do think it's just such a strong, there's such strong conditioning there, for us to just push and do. And it's, this is going down a rabbit hole, but I think it all goes back to like it's like the ego mindset, right? Where it's like you are what you do and you are what you accomplish, and your worth is all, your accomplishments and your success and all, like it all goes back to that, just kind of this ego driven mindset that is really dangerous. I mean, it really is. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I had a feeling you would say something similar, and I think that everybody listening can see this happening, right? Like this isn't a surprise. Like we're not living in a sustainable way energetically and emotionally, let alone our food system, right? Like
100%.
This is not sustainable. And it's actually, I mean, I have a big journey with that as well. Really, I'm very similar to you, Hope. It was like, go, go, go. Anxiety was my norm. Like I was always stressed, trying to control things, trying to like do type A personality. And I'm glad that you mentioned this, because this has been the biggest eye opener for me. And the work that I do with my clients now is really understanding that our worth doesn't come from how many things you get checked off in a day.
Right.
And this is what we're taught, that you are not a worthy member of society if you don't look a certain way, if you don't accomplish a bunch of things every day, if you don't get a certain type of job, right? And have this like picture of what life is. So I want to add to what you said so beautifully, and just add this, that we need to do some work as a society about even our definition of what it means to be successful. And that's been a really big piece of my journey, is like honoring that success isn't working 12-hour days and not having any time for myself. My version of success means I've got ample time in my days to rest, to go for a walk, to hang out with friends, to enjoy life, like to look after myself and work on myself and my own healing. So, and we see cultures that are like this. I mean, I think of Italy, and when I went to Italy, right, they take 3 hours off every afternoon to do nothing.
Yes, it's amazing. It's amazing. I think the same thing. My husband and I went not too long ago, a few years ago, and that's it. And when we went, it was sometime in August, where they have holiday, where everything literally shuts down for like 3 weeks. It's like they just shut down and just go. I'm like, this is crazy. This is amazing. Like, and it's like no big deal. And it's, and we do see it in other cultures, and we,
we need to learn from those cultures, in my opinion. Right. And this is, can be really eye-opening. Maybe anybody listening to this is going, wow, that is me. I'm caught in this cycle and this hamster wheel. Right. And I want you to know, if that is you, that there's no room for guilt or shame here. Like this is the world that we live in, and it's so easy to get sucked into it. And I even notice sometimes when I'm getting sucked back into it. For
sure.
This is still a work in progress for me to slow down and to connect my worth and value with, just being a human being and showing up and, with my heart and doing the work that I'm doing. So like, this takes practice and commitment and work when we're constantly being bombarded with the movies and advertisements and online social media. Like everything is trying to pull us into that overwhelm mode. And it's also a very convenient, this is a rabbit hole we're not going to fully go down to because we don't have time to, but this being busy all the time is also a very convenient substitute for any addiction. Right. Like I often see this with my clients, is that escapism of, I don't even know how to sit with myself. I don't even know how to rest. Right. I don't even know what that is. It's uncomfortable. It's awkward. I want to just stay busy. If I'm not eating sugar, drinking alcohol, or numbing out in some other way, well, I'm just going to stay occupied. So I don't actually have to sit with my emotions. Right. I don't actually have to connect with myself, because that's scary. So there's a lot of work to be done there. Right. And I think, like, I know that's been a huge part of my journey, is learning to slow down and learning to value that and having to set boundaries around that. And it's hard.
It is,
because people in your life won't get it. Right. Like I have family members that were like, what are you doing? Right. Like,
for sure.
Yeah. So
I totally
it's tricky.
agree.
It's vital.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that is a huge piece, because I mean, I used to do the same thing. I'm a huge meditator now, and that's like just part of my life. Like I do it every day, and it's just a non-negotiable. For so long I resisted, like even like yoga, and I have freaking yoga at my studio, like that I own, but it's like, I don't have time to be still. Like I don't have time. I can't, I don't, and it was like, well, I can't meditate. I can't, and I hear that so often from people, like, well, I can't sit still long enough, and I can't, but it's like, no, you can. You just have to make a choice. And like you said, a lot of times it's not that you can't, it's that you're afraid what's going to happen if you do, right? Like what's going to come up if you are sitting with yourself and being with you. Like, you know, it's definitely a struggle, and it's definitely just kind of this Western conditioning again, just going back to that, like if just go and don't stop, and you don't have to think about it or deal with it. You know, it just, I agree. It's definitely a shift. And like you said, it's always a work in progress. Like that's always going to come up, but it's just a work in progress.
Yeah. Yeah. So be gentle with yourselves,
Yes.
everybody listening.
Yes.
I mean, maybe this week it's just booking an hour off to be with yourself at some point, right? To go for a leisurely walk or to have no plans.
Yeah, to do nothing.
How radical. Yeah, or to do nothing, right? It's such a powerful part of what I love helping my clients learn to do as well, is create space for stillness.
For sure.
Yeah, this is such a big conversation for another day. So I want to ask you one more thing here before we wrap up, because I think, you know, we're talking about burnout, we're talking about this stress response in the body. You've mentioned some of these things already, but I think I would love if you could sort of tie this full circle. How do we actually support our bodies and recover from a burnout state or from this adrenal exhaustion, right? Like, I mean, we're talking about a couple things here around slow down, meditate, do the yoga,
all of
right?
those things. Yes, all of those.
Yeah. Are there any other pieces that you haven't already mentioned here that would?
I think first and foremost, knowing that it's a process. And I think, like you were saying, like and especially if you're in like the true exhaustive state in the adrenals, like for some people, it could take over a year. It could take a couple of years to really bring yourself back to like that baseline, right? So first and foremost, knowing that it's a process, it's a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. And for sure. I mean, the lifestyle changes are huge, right? Being like managing the stress, the nervous system, finding time to slow down, like adding mindfulness, all of those things, giving yourself, supportive nutrition, right? Like we talked about minerals earlier. It's, the vitamin C and the sodium, like magnesium, all these minerals are really vital to helping repair the adrenals, keeping stable blood sugar, like you talk about all the time. Like that's a huge way to, lower inflammation in the body and help your body to repair itself. But giving yourself the time and the space and like the grace to like make it a journey, not knowing it's not going to come overnight. But really, truly, I do think the biggest piece is the lifestyle piece for the adrenals. Like, of course, the minerals and the nutrition, all that is a huge piece. But like we were saying before, the supplements, like none of that's going to do anything if you're still burning the candle at both ends and you're running yourself ragged. So it's the mindfulness, the stress, really, management, nervous system, all of that's really the biggest piece of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That makes so much sense. Thank you for sharing that. I think, I totally agree with exactly that, right? Like this is so about a lifestyle. And this is why so many people have a hard time. They don't want to actually change their lifestyle.
Yeah, exactly.
But this is the only way through, right? Is to really look at some of these pieces. And I hope that everybody's feeling more inspired to do that, to start doing some proper testing, to really learn to slow down and really start looking at where these sources of stress are coming from in your life. This has been so much fun chatting, Hope, and I'm just keeping an eye on the time and want to be respectful of your time. There's so much more we could talk about here.
I know.
Thank you for coming on. This has been so good. I've learned a lot.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Hopefully everybody listening has as well.
Yes, thanks so much. I'm so glad to chat with you. This is such a good conversation. I loved this.
Yes. Okay, so where can everybody come and find more about you online? I know there's also a lot of areas that you are an expert in and have training in that we didn't even get to touch on today, that we'll have to definitely have you back to dive into some of those. But
love to.
Where can everybody come and find you?
Yeah. So I'm probably most active on Instagram. It's at the Hope Pedraza. I have a free Facebook group. It's Live Wholesome and Healthy, and it's all things functional nutrition, big into human design, which we'll have to talk about another day. So we talk about that in the group. And then my website, hopefulandwholesome.com.
Amazing. I'll make sure all of those links are obviously in the show notes below. So definitely go and check out everything that Hope is up to. I know I am. I'm going to keep learning from you. And I can't thank you enough for being here today. This was definitely an eye-opening conversation for me. I've taken some notes. I've got to look at some things.
Thanks,
I need
Danny.
to do some tests.
I'm so glad. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Hope. And thank you, everyone, for tuning into another episode. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you for tuning into another episode. If you're loving what we talked about today, please remember to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone you love. And if you're ready to dive deeper into discovering your root causes and patterns that are keeping you hooked on sugar, be sure to check out our brand new free workshop series that will help you kick emotional eating for good. Find the link to download this free series and other amazing resources in the show notes below.